Welcome to the Michelle Rempel-Garner podcast.
Hello, fellow patriots. Today, on this week's episode of the Michelle Rempel-Garner podcast, we're going to talk about the future of political commentary on talk shows and on late night. But we're also going to talk about some big immigration news that came up in Canada this week. We're also going to talk about some of Mark Carney's conflicts of interest and the issues that that's posing in Canada right now. And we're also going to talk and close with Coldplay-gate, because it actually has some parallels with political issues management. And I'm joined today to break all these issues down with veteran political strategist, my chief of staff, my right hand, Sean Schnell. Sean, how are you?
I'm good. Again, another very busy day, busy
I know
week, lots
it's the
going
middle of
on.
the summer. It should be a little quieter, right? In theory. That's what Mark
Well,
Carney
I
wanted
think that's how
anyways.
some of these stories kind of bubbled their way up to the top too.
So let's talk about that. There's a couple of big stories that I think, like as you said, they may not have made the top of the pile of news in a busier news week, but they did in the middle of the summer. And the first was that Stephen Colbert's late night show was outright canceled by his network. Some people were saying that was because of his political ideology, and I think you have a different idea.
Yeah, well, there certainly is some mixed opinion out there as to the reasons for the cancellation there. I actually, you've heard me talk about this just in our private conversations before. I think you're seeing a little bit of a shift within the public discourse around celebrity, this idea of celebrity worship and whatnot. Anyway, there's a bit of a rejection, I think, happening amongst the public in this, and it's being reflected in all sorts of tangible ways. When you're seeing things in ratings, you're seeing things in like ticket
Sure.
sales and marketing campaigns and whatnot. And so there's real fallout that comes from this shift in how the public is consuming entertainment and engaging with celebrities and personalities like that, which is it's neither here nor there. It's just a reality of where we're at. And I think that you're seeing in this case a lot of excuses being thrown out as to why this show may or may not be canceled. But I think you're going to see more and more of this happening in the not too distant future, and people will try to tie it to all sorts of things. Politics is the number one culprit that people like to attach to these sorts of things. But I know there's lots of other theories and rumors and speculation as to actually what the reasons were behind this cancellation. So I'm not sure that I would jump right to politics in this
Yeah, I
particular
wouldn't
case at
either.
all.
Here's what I think actually happened. So I think you've got a screenshot of a tweet that somebody probably hit the nail on the head. So somebody tweeted out here, they're postulating that Stephen Colbert's show costs more than $100 million a year to produce and is losing more than $40 million a year. I think it's a simple economic decision for the network, because I'm guessing, like, again, we don't have access to his ratings or anything, but I'm guessing that in that slot, his audience is probably quite old. And even, when they pull social media clips, it's hard to monetize that to a scale that justifies $100 million production schedule. And like, so some people might be listening to our podcast and go, "Hey, this is a show about Canadian politics. Why are you talking about Stephen Colbert?" I think it has a lesson for Canadian political talk news, in particular the
Yeah,
CBC.
interesting.
I so let's think about some of the big CBC talk political talk shows, right? Like Power and Politics, for example. I'm sure it costs an astronomical amount of money to produce. I know they have, it's a production heavy show. There's a lot of invested in, not just the content production, but also, like the lighting, all of the things that you and I are, doing on a podcast off the corner of our desk. And it costs a lot, right? And if the CBC didn't have its public subsidy, I'm not sure there would be a business case for those types of shows either, because I can't see
Right.
how they could make money off of that format, dumping so much money into the production. Like, and again, this isn't investigative journalism, Power and Politics, and it's commentary that's actually in a lot of ways kind of similar to what Stephen Colbert pumps out in the US, right? There are similarities. So I think that Colbert being, if you agree to the premise that Colbert's show was canceled largely due to economics. Okay, and some people may disagree with that, whatever. But there definitely was economics behind the decision. Then I think it doesn't bode well for some of CBC's political shows, which frankly, I think have been at the nexus of the loss of public trust in the network, right? Because they're very biased, they're very one-sided, they're not inquisitive, they're sensational, and so I don't think that those shows could survive if they had to compete privately.
Yeah, that's interesting perspective, and I think that you're probably right on the right track there as far as what the future of these sorts of publications are looking like down the road. And I think that, yeah, attaching economics to it as the primary reason makes a lot more sense as opposed to politics, because at the end of the day, it comes down to, is this a viable product going forward? And so I think you've got a lot of people at these types of organizations and networks that are doing the math on that. And you're exactly right, with the exception of the CBC, that knows that it has a gravy train of taxpayer dollars that are coming to it, so they don't really have to think about the economics until they're forced to confront those realities, when there's conversations that are happening in places like Parliament, and they're examining how taxpayer dollars are being spent. So yeah, it's an interesting conversation, and I think one that's relevant going forward. And I think that the reality is, as I talk about, like, as people are sort of rejecting some of this celebrity culture, celebrity worship, that all that really means is dollars and cents at the ends of the day, because people are choosing to watch things differently, consume entertainment differently, and at the end of the day, that reflects on the balance sheet for these types of organizations.
I agree, and to underscore that point, the network that produces Stephen Colbert's show is a for-profit entity, and if you accept the notion that they canceled it likely due to poor economic output or performance, then you carry that over to the public broadcaster, right? And if it's highly unlikely that they're, quote, making money off of, let's say, David Cochran's show, right? Then you have to ask the question, well, what is the value add of putting public funds into it, particularly in the context that those shows are aggressively pushing left-wing bias. And I mean, there's a whole lawsuit right now, right, about a former, maybe current CBC employee who said that he was essentially discriminated against because he tried to bring conservative voices onto the CBC. So here you've got a show that likely isn't, knocking the ratings socks off of Canadians. It's producing left-wing bias under the guise of a so-called neutral public broadcaster, and then producing left-wing sensational opinion. And I think it really underscores the lack of business case for tax dollars for producing that type of content. And I'll just close with this. Like, you and I'm a conservative. I'm an elected conservative member of parliament. You're a longtime conservative strategist. We talk about that on our podcast. People know that the content we're going to be putting out, it is going to come from a lens of that context, right? There are podcasts that, like, they're run by liberal strategists. I'm thinking about, like, Stephen Carter's podcast, right? It's very clear that they are liberals, right? Like, one of their former participants is now a liberal MP. The CBC, it kind of pretends that it's like, oh, it's a neutral broadcaster, but their content is aggressively left wing. And I think that for me, the reason why I wanted to talk about the Colbert cancellation was it kind of underscores whether we Canadian public should be asking, is it appropriate to be spending tax dollars on a likely unprofitable model of spreading very one-sided, sensational political opinion?
Yeah, and I think that that's a question then on the other side of the coin for Parliament to be asking: is it appropriate for tax dollars to be spent on an organization where people are choosing to not watch it. They're making their choice in consuming news and information in a variety of different places. And if an organization is resistant to change and beholden to a particular biased perspective, then those are fair questions for Parliament to be asking as they are
Sure.
funneling tax dollars towards an organization.
100%.
And that's the reality of the conversation about a public broadcaster, is if people are choosing with their time and with their clicks and views and whatnot to consume information and news elsewhere. And we're seeing that. We see that in poll after poll after poll that younger Canadians are consuming news and information in way different ways than their parents and grandparents were before them. So it's a fair question to be asking, is this a viable organization going forward as it relates to
Yeah.
putting out news and information, especially
And
with that biased lens that you're talking about?
And it's why you and I, like, it's why we take time to do a podcast. It's why we take time to communicate on other platforms, because we know that, like, our
Exactly.
constituents, the broader Canadian public, are consuming information differently. So as a legislator, I have to consume, or I have to produce that information in different milieus, which is kind of a nice bridge into the next segment, which is an article I wrote on a different platform on Substack, which, by the way, listeners, if you haven't subscribed to my Substack, it's a newsletter. It's completely free, but it allows me to get around the Liberals' censorship bills and algorithmic downgrading of certain types of content by directly communicating through an email newsletter, right? And it's free, it's great. But this week I wrote a piece about a file that came up during our research for our shadow minister portfolio, which is immigration. And there's so much on that file this week. Like, I mean, we could literally talk for 3 hours just about immigration, and I think is going to become more of a topic on this podcast. But let's focus on one area that came up this week. So, if you want to throw the screenshot up, Sean, um, we were doing some research in the Ottawa office this week, and credit to all the team that worked on this file. There's the list of something called a positive labor market impact assessments for the first quarter of 2025 was published. Long story short, too long didn't read it. Over 50,000 jobs were made available to temporary foreign workers. About 30,000 of those were made available to um, temporary foreign workers outside of legitimately hard to fill seasonal agricultural work, like, let's say, fruit picking. And then another 15,000 of those were dedicated to low skilled temporary foreign workers, like food service. Like McDonald's was on the list, for example, for people for giving jobs to temporary foreign workers for food production. I know this is something that you feel strongly about, particularly in the context of youth. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, I think this is insane, and I think that people that see these sorts of numbers and see this sort of story being published think the same way, because they are seeing people across the country that are struggling to find work and wondering how it's possible that the government could continually be allowing individuals to come in and fill these temporary positions while youth and young Canadian unemployment is at levels that we haven't seen since Chrétien was prime minister. And so it's a massive conversation that needs to be happening. It's one that I don't think is getting near the attention that it should. And so I think that people need to absolutely take the time and go and read your article that you published this week, because I think it'll just infuriate people as they
Yeah,
look at this.
maybe we'll put the link to that article in the video description for those of you who are watching this on YouTube. And I encourage people to read the article because it also contains a link to the list itself. So if you want to look and see what employers in your region have been hiring temporary foreign workers, you should. I call it the list of shame, right? Um, so listen, there's a couple of other issues outside of what you just flagged, which is it, especially in the low skill TFW stream, there are legitimate, serious concerns about those jobs going to temporary foreign workers instead of Canadian youth, because it takes away vital job training for Canadian youth, right? And as we're seeing an economic modality disruption with artificial intelligence, particularly in white collar jobs, I think it's just unconscionable that the government is allowing companies, for example, to hire TFWs for administrative assistants. That's wild to me. And, just a couple of other impacts as well. I think because so what happened was the former conservative government was actually it was Jason Kenney in his role as he was Minister of Employment, I believe, at the time. He made significant reforms to the TFW program in 2013 and 2014 to prevent the abuse of the program, to cap the numbers, to make sure that TFWs were only being used in regions with significantly significantly lower unemployment numbers than the national average in the seasonal agricultural worker sector. Like he did all of these reforms, and you and I remember, because at the time I was in cabinet too. Businesses like Tim Hortons, McDonald's, they were just screaming bloody murder over this change of policy. And
Oh
why?
yeah.
Why? Because they profit off of the suppression of wages, right? If you have this continual supply, government mandated supply of low skilled temporary foreign workers, it doesn't allow for natural wage growth. It's a wage distortion. And so, of course, they were like, well, I remember, I won't say which company, but they're like, well, this product, instead of costing $5 in the morning, it's going to be $8. And I'm like, for real? And
Oh
also, like,
yeah.
are you sure? And like,
I
so it
remember
was like
that.
it was like our fault that we were trying to ensure that there was wage growth for Canadians. And I think that that's bananas. So, I hate reading articles where people are, you've got these economists and, policy experts that are like, we don't know why, wage growth isn't keeping up with inflation in Canada. It's bizarre. And I'm like, well, hello, look at this list, right? Like, it's crazy.
Oh,
And
it's
so,
insane.
I'll let you get in here, but I'll just say, like conservatives, like we believe that jobs should go to the first of it, like to Canadian workers first and foremost, and that like this program has a big history of abuse, including abusing the foreign workers themselves. So, major reforms are needed. But that list itself is shocking, and I think people should go and look at it.
They absolutely need to go look at it, and then the next thing they need to do is call their member of parliament and tell them
It's a
that this
great
is
point.
unacceptable. There, because this is totally preventable. This has been predictable, and people should be furious about this. If you know somebody, if you're a young person that can't get a job, that can't get out of your parents' basement, you need to be calling your member of parliament daily about this, because this is insane abuse of the program. This is not how it was
Yeah,
designed to be, and this has been ongoing for a long time. And I'm tired of hearing excuses about this from the Liberals. You guys have been in power for 10 years, and so they throw up their hands and say, oh, we need to have another look at this, or we can have a committee study on
exactly.
this. It's ridiculous. It is beyond the pale at this point in time. I'm going to put up this article that talks about this. Youth Session
Great
sees
point.
young Canadians struggling, most poll data shows. And if people go and look into the data, like I said before, we are seeing unemployment amongst young Canadians at a level that we haven't seen since Jean Chrétien was the prime minister, outside of the COVID era. And so they are absolutely destroying the future of an entire generation of workers. And they come out and they say, well, these are jobs that Canadians don't want to do, that young people don't want to do. That is garbage. That is
It is
absolute
garbage.
nonsense. People want a job. And so people that are listening to this can remember their first job as a teenager, as a college student, and the experience that they got into that. And we are stalling. We are failing to launch an entire generation of workers in this country, because we are allowing the abuse of this program, and we are allowing the Liberals to create all kinds of excuses for no reason. And Canadians should be mad as hell about this, because we are absolutely
I
disenfranchising an
agree.
entire generation. I am so ticked off about this. I am angry that people aren't talking more about this. So go read your article, call your member of parliament. If you've got a friend, if you've got a niece, a nephew, a grandchild that can't go out and find a job, you need to be screaming from the rooftops about this, because we are absolutely failing an entire generation of Canadians in exchange for nothing. End of
Here,
rant.
here.
Sorry.
No, that's great. And you have kids, like I have
Yeah.
kids. And it's sad to see the corporate excuses for these programs, which you outlined there, the thing that we hear over and over again as justification for these programs, again, outside of the areas where like seasonal agricultural work or
Yep.
the very few regions in the country where the rate of unemployment is well below the national average. This is what we hear from these guys. We hear, oh, well, no Canadian wants to do this job. Like you said, bunk. Then we hear, well, government benefit programs, they prevent people from working. Again, I find that hard to believe, and if the government wants to look into that, they should do it. But they shouldn't just be giving these guys more work or sorry, more TFW permits on that premise that they've never wanted to delve into. And then the last thing, I often hear is like, oh, well, we do pay people enough. They just don't want to do these jobs. And it's like, come on. So especially when I see, there was it was the Grain Growers of Canada, they're a lobby group that do a lot of work for rural Canada, important lobby work, but they hired a TFW for like it looked like a GR or a comms position in Ottawa.
Insane. It's
And you've
insane.
got to, it's like there better be a pretty good reason to hire a comms GR position in Ottawa with a TFW. Like, oh, that's it's crazy.
I
But it's
remember I
you
remember
know,
that conversation you're talking about. We won't say which company it was, but it was
you
worse
were in
than
the
even,
office.
yeah, it was worse than even what you
You
said,
were
because
so mad.
I remember they said, well, if you guys do this, we're going to stick up the Liberals campaign sign in our
That's right.
business
That's
instead.
right.
And so it was
Great
as
point.
egregious as that. It was so political,
Yeah.
and it was just arrogant. And again,
How dare
they,
you want wages to be higher for Canadians? How
yeah,
dare you? How
just
dare you?
the level of excuses is just, it's unbelievable in this. And so yeah, you're right, you're exactly right. Like, people need to go and look through this list, because it will absolutely blow your mind.
So, this is a topic that we're going to be talking about on this podcast quite a bit over the next few months, particularly as we get into the fall, as well as immigration in general. So, for listeners that potentially haven't hit auto download, if make sure you do, because this we're going to be getting this information to you, and we're also going to be taking some initiatives, new initiatives over the summer as well too. Without getting ahead of myself, our colleague Garnet Jennis, an MP from the northern part, well, Edmonton area of Alberta, he's really passionate about this too, and we're going to have a lot more to say about this in the coming weeks and months. So make sure that you subscribe and download. Now, there's another topic. We've got two more topics to get through on today's episode. You were so mad at Mark Carney this week, Sean. On one of our morning calls this week, you were just the epic Chanel rant on his conflict of interest stuff that came out this week. So do you want to explain to folks what was released this week? And then I know we've got some clips to show how egregious this is.
Yeah, so this week, and I'll put up a article here so that we can see what we're talking about here. So this week, the ethics commissioner published the list of Mark Carney's investments, and it was a lengthy list.
It
And
was
so
crazy. I'm just looking at it
yeah,
right now and I'm like, man, it must be nice
so
to be rich. Jeez.
yeah, and so for people that might remember, this was a topic of conversation back when Mark Carney first began running for leader of the Liberal Party, and then subsequently won that race, became prime minister. And there were a number of questions about whether he was going to have any conflicts of interest and how he was going to handle those. And here now we saw the ethics commissioner publish this list. Why this matters, why it was so frustrating for me and Canadians that were watching this, is because Mark Carney denied that this was going to be the case, that there was going to be
There's
a
nothing.
lengthy list of conflicts of interest. In fact, there was not going to be any. I actually, if you don't mind, I'll maybe play the clip. This goes
Play the
back to
clip.
March
Yes.
of 2025, this year, when he was asked by Rosemary Barton of the CBC about this very topic. Let me play the clip.
Yeah.
I'm complying with the rules in advance. Point final. Yes.
Someone who spent most of his life in the private sector. There's no possible conflict of interest in your assets. It's very difficult to believe.
Look inside yourself, Rosemary. I mean, you start from a a prior of conflict and ill will. I have served in the private sector. I have stood up for Canada. I have left my roles in the private sector.
Look inside yourself, Rosemary. The gaslighting, right? Like,
Yeah, she asks him
I'm no
straight up
Rosemary Barton
because it's
fan,
hard to
but like
believe.
he gaslit her, right? She was like, well, she for once asked a pointed question that was fair to not a conservative, and he gaslit her and was
No,
and
he
he said,
lied.
"Ugh,"
He straight
he
up
lied.
lied. Not, and he
No,
lied to the
so
country.
like, and just to explain what the list you're talking about is, maybe in a little bit more detail, it's a list of essentially, I guess, companies that he has investments or interests in, financial interests in, that he's, quote, placed in a blind trust. But how is it a blind trust if you know what companies you have interest in? It's not a blind trust, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, what I have heard this week is that on the lobbyist registry, some of those companies have actually had meetings with PMO staff and his
Yeah, something
staff,
like
if not
9
himself.
companies or something.
Yeah, so clearly it's a problem, and it just, uh, you and I have speculated, and I've heard some backroom Ottawa gossip about, like, well, how long is Mark Carney going to do this? Like, he's not, his honeymoon's not going to last forever. Things will get tough at some point in time. He has a minority parliament. When things get tough, is he just going to quit? Is he just going to leave? Um, and in that context, coupled with these massive lists of financial interests, you have to ask why he's doing the job to begin with, right? Is he, like, we haven't heard him talk a lot about some of the big issues that are more on the social side of Canadian policy, justice, let's say let's put immigration in there, although it has an economic component too, crime. He hates that. He hates talking about it, almost like he gets hives. But he lights up when he's talking about, subsidies for, or sorry, putting a tax on certain types of jet fuel or whatever it was, like, and or he lights up when he's talking about modular home subsidies, and it's like you start going through that list and it's like, oh wait, you have a financial interest
Yeah.
in a company that has modular homes, and it's like, well, what are you managing to, Mark Carney? If you're managing to enriching yourself and your buddies, then, like, at least just be honest about it. Like, have the courtesy, be like, yeah, I'm totally going to get rich off some of these decisions. So
Yeah, you can't win elections if you're honest about it like that way, though.
I guess so, I do think uh that was a big issue. It's something that we'll have to track as well too. But it wasn't just March this came up, Sean. Like, you remember in the House of Commons in the fall, after he was appointed as Justin Trudeau's former senior advisor on finance, or whatever the title was, I was up in the House of Commons asking questions about some of the Brookfield affiliated companies and how they were managing that potential conflict of interest, right? So this has been
And I
an
think
issue
about
from some time.
Stripe too, right?
Stripe was another one where it was like he was on the board. We had to ask questions about policy that was coming in place with payment processors, and it was just, so the fact is that this isn't just like something that's come out of the blue. This is months long of an issue. It's probably gonna, well, I will dog him into upcoming legislative sessions, and again, it's something that we'll track here and we'll litigate here as well too.
Yeah, well, and I know you and your conservative colleagues will continue to hold his feet to the fire on this, and it will dog him that way. But I hope Canadians do as well. With if you're living in a riding that has a Liberal member of Parliament, we talked a bit about this on the last podcast of whether truth matters or not, and this absolutely cannot just be let go. This is something we've never seen before. We are seeing just straight up lies out of the Prime Minister and this government, and that can't stand. I was just gonna. I know you flagged this article for me earlier this week here too, from John Robson. Carney's conflict of interest falsehoods, part of a long history of mistruths, and
Yes.
that's the point here. Is that this isn't just a one-off. We are now. This guy has not been here that long, and that tends to be the excuse that Liberals like to throw out there, is to say, well, he's new on the job, you can't blame him for everything. Well, you can blame him for the long list of lies and mistruths that are starting to stack up here in a pretty short period of time. And if this is what we are getting on the front end, to your point, what are we going to get 6 months from now, 12 months from now? What can we possibly expect? Because can you believe anything that him or this government is telling you? Because at this point in time, the answer is no.
Yeah,
More or
I
less
agree.
everything that he's put in the window when the campaign came around, they have backtracked on, done a 180, flip-flopped on. I don't know if you want to get into the big tariff thing this week here too.
Oh,
I mean,
I
there's
mean, like, yeah, like he essentially, to me, misled the country during the campaign on what was possible with tariffs, or he's just given up, right? He says a U.S. trade deal without some tariffs is unlikely. So, but during the campaign, he was Captain Canada, the Trump whisperer, and it's like, well, I guess you kind of failed with that, bud. But I think that these issues are going to come to a head more in the fall, but like he is laying some really dangerous track here for himself and for the country by not addressing these issues in the summer. He should have just divested those assets. That would have been the smarter thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. And on the topic of the tariffs, you had liberals that were running around saying this guy was uniquely qualified to meet the moment
That's right.
to fight, and that they wouldn't back down. And now all of a sudden,
He
it's a
was
different
uniquely
message.
self-interested. Like
Yeah.
some people were saying that I can't remember the exact composition of that list of companies that he had financial interests in, but it was like well in the 90% like range were actually American companies, right? So, if people were rightly asking, it's like, okay, well, like, what are you focusing on in your negotiations? And the fact that he's had these questions kind of dog him, and like it's pretty easy to address this. It's like, don't hold those assets. Right?
Yeah,
If
and I
you're
mean,
all in,
yeah.
because remember, he's like, "Oh, I'm all in." It's like, well, are you? Like, because you've actually held all of these financial interests. So if you're that doesn't sound like all in to me, right? Anyway.
Yeah, and that's I guess the point here is that you have this prime minister that has come in and has made all these claims on the front end, and now it's turning out to not be true. And you've got liberals that have come out and they're making all kinds of excuses. Well, he's new on the job, and he's trying to find his footing on this. But yet Canadians are still struggling. Canadians are still out of work. They are concerned about how their
Yeah.
businesses are going to profit in the midst of this. And so these are real concerns. These are real issues. And yeah, you said earlier, like, we come at it from the perspective of conservatives. So we have bias, but we can still call a spade a spade. And so this isn't just us dumping on the Liberals and Mark Carney. It's calling out lies and mistruths that are impacting Canadians' lives and have an impact on things like negotiations and where these tariffs and whatnot are going to end. And it was a bunch of garbage that they fed the Canadian public in the midst of an election. And so you have to ask why. Well, they wanted to
So
hold on to power.
it'll be interesting to see if the worm turns on him on this in the fall. But
We'll see.
let's close with a situation where the worm definitely did turn this week. We have to talk about this. I don't want to talk about it as a pop cultural phenomenon, but I
Okay.
want to talk about it like this is a nice nonpartisan political issues management analysis. Okay. So in politics, you're constantly assessing issues that are coming up. You're thinking about rapid response in real time. Um, let's show an example. Do we actually have the clip? I'm sure everybody saw this,
Don't
but
have the
this is
clip. I've got the screenshot
here's
of
the
the
screenshot.
statement.
So here's an example of the worst political issues management I've ever seen. So for listeners who don't know what we're talking about, this CEO and I guess the head of HR or the VP of people management or something, they went to a Coldplay concert in a box seat, and I guess the kiss cam turned on them, but like I'll put it this way, they weren't supposed to be like canoodling. And their reaction was explosive. Like both of them kind of busted each other because like the guy like dove to the floor and the woman like turned around and she had her hands in her face. And like so put whatever everything else aside. Let's put that screenshot up one more time here. It was the response from the company that was so bad. So it took 48 hours, almost 48 hours since the incident occurred for the company to put out a statement. And the company is called Astronomer. It says, We're committed to the value and culture that have guided us since our founding. Our leaders are expected to set the standards in both conduct and accountability. The board of directors has initiated a formal investigation into this matter. Uh, One of the other employees that people were saying was there was not at the event. No other employees were in the video. Andy Byron, this is the CEO, has not put out any statement, and reports saying otherwise are all incorrect. So how did this happen? So the fact that there was an information vacuum, that this company allowed the media, social media, comedians, pundits to fill the vacuum on what was going on. I think it had, some people are saying, well, it had brand visibility for the company. I don't think it was. This is not a public company. I think they just went through a Series D round of investment. This is not something that their investors are going to particularly be happy about in terms of how could it inspire confidence in their product. Because it essentially says that the senior most level of their management structure, it doesn't have judgment, right? And the reason why they had to put a little disclaimer at the end of their official statement was that the internet had put out a fake statement from the CEO. It fooled a lot of our friends, actually. Like, I was
Yeah.
the one who was like, "Are you sure this is real?" And people are like, "No, it's real." But it was so bad that it was believable. Like, it just sounded like something that this guy would have done in the context of what the internet was painting him out to be. And, I feel really badly for like the families that are involved in all that sort of stuff. Putting that all aside, wow, how did a company that had $1 billion valuation not have somebody in-house, not have someone on the phone to deal with crisis management such that it took them 48 hours and the whole scandal became the internet, the meme of the week. Just wow, that was something.
Yeah, it is. And I think there's a lesson there. Like I get it when the small mom and pop shop or some little business all of a sudden is thrust to the front of the headlines and the internet that they're not capable of
Yeah.
managing crisis comms. But if you are a company that has some serious money behind you and all of a sudden you find yourself in the midst of a viral tsunami,
Right?
go hire a crisis communicator. Like there are people that specialize in this
Yes.
that have worked in the political and public facing spheres that know how to handle crisis comms. Go hire them. Make sure that you
Yes.
get them. Don't wait 48 hours, and you bring them in and you help manage this, and don't try and manage it on your own, because the reality is
Exactly.
like this stuff just it's like a spark, and it just ignites all of a sudden. And
And listen, let's be honest. I've been in the middle of a few things over the years, nothing like scandalous, but like situations where it's like, how do I handle this situation? And the reason why I bring that up is when it happens to you, you are not objective. It is actually
totally.
impossible to make decisions on communications because like I don't think people understand the pressure of having the national media on you. For me, it's been on policy positions, for example, that I've taken, right? Like, I don't think people understand that mental pressure, and that's why, it's a learned skill in politics, but it's also a learned skill in leadership overall. And the fact that, again, like, just you and I were texting, I had other actually people of all political stripe. It was kind of like this unifying moment, being like, are they going to hire a crisis person right now?
No, and
48
I know
hours.
I know exactly what was happening in there. There was all sorts of like communication likely that was going on, but it's
Yes,
paralysis. It's a
fair
form
enough.
of paralysis that sets in, that
Or
you are almost
denial.
afraid
This
to,
is fine.
yeah, or you just kind of say, oh, it'll blow over or whatever. And in this day and age, with social media and digital
Yeah,
media being what it is, like by the time you've had a board meeting, the story's been around the world twice. And so
100%.
you have to move. You can't just sit there. You can't just let this happen. Like you said, you feel bad for the people that are involved, and families and coworkers and all sorts of this. But the worst part about it is that there are means to respond to this, and people that know how to help companies and organizations through situations like this. But man, they missed the boat on
They
bringing
sure-
in crisis comms there. It was a
Yeah,
missed opportunity to get ahead of the story as a company. I mean, the individuals involved, that's a whole different kind of crisis comms that
The
that
fact it
is
took that
involved.
company, the fact it took that company 48 hours to put out a statement, not only underscores for me the lack of judgment or knowledge of the need to have a professional crisis communicator or you know PR person in the loop somewhere, but it also shows and I'll close with this, there's often a lack of skill set on corporate boards
Yeah,
on
good
political
point.
awareness and crisis management. Over the years we've seen, we've actually ended up having a lot of different corporate groups reach out and whatnot after the fact, and it's like, how did your board not tell you that this public policy thing that the liberals put in place wasn't coming down the pipe? How did you not see that? How did you not risk mitigate for that? And I do think that, to your point about the media cycle being so compressed, and like the media cycle being memes now, um, the corporate board skill set has not caught up to having people embedded that have lived through the things that we have lived through, right?
I
So
was just gonna say, like, corporate boards, if you're listening to this and you're saying, "Oh, I don't know anything about this," or whatever,
you need to know about this.
some of the best crisis communicators are people that have been in the political arena and understand it, because it is a totally, like you said, it is a totally different learned skill set than the
Yeah.
types of just general communications. And that, and I'm not dumping on comms people at all. Like that, it's a totally
No.
different skill set. And like some of the ones that have been in the political arena that have been through campaigns and government and legislation and all that, they are some of the most skilled at this
Well,
particular
and like I
type
said,
of communications.
if you are on a corporate board or you are in a C-suite and you find yourself in my office or one of my colleagues' office of any political stripe in the future going, wow, we need your help like reversing this policy decision, or wow, we need your help reversing this advocacy campaign by blah blah blah. It's like, well, how did you not see this? Like 90% of the stuff that comes into my office, it's like, how did you not see this coming? How do you not have that expertise feeding into the risk cycle of
Yep.
your board discussion? So yes, board stuff, ethics, profit and loss, recruitment, long-term investment strategies, M&A stuff, yes, of course, but if it takes your company 48 hours to put out a statement in the middle of a crisis like that, you don't have the skill set you need to survive. So, anyway, that I don't want it to be a dunk on that situation. I actually think it was really unfortunate, but it was like this. It was a good example of like you and I. We try to tell people through this podcast now stuff that happens that you and I kind of text each other irritated about during the day. Companies that don't see something coming or can't manage an issue and then expect like the government to bail them out. I'm not saying that that was necessarily the case in this situation, but it is a
Sure.
skill set, and
Learning
it's important.
opportunity.
Learning opportunity, yes. And with that, I think that's about enough for this summer weekend episode of the Michelle Rumpel-Garner podcast. Again, I'm joined by veteran political strategist Sean Schnell. Click auto download. We have new episodes all the time for you, and we cover the major issues facing the country and sometimes a little other stuff as well too. Click auto download. If you're watching this on YouTube, click subscribe. Working hard for you. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening. If you want even more political news, subscribe at michellerempelgarner.substack.com. And if you like what you hear, be sure to share this podcast.